Hello, welcome to Quackalope, and today I'm bringing you a Kickstarter preview/review for Windward by Eldorado Games. And I'll be 100% upfront with you. I've spent a large part of the last week getting this game in front of as many different gaming groups as I can, and I've spent a large part of today, including the last few hours, playing this game with some people who've never played it before. And the overwhelming response and reaction from all of the people that I've played this game with has been that we just really like it. And I'm approaching this review from that point. I genuinely like this game. So much so that after the first gameplay, I was already figuring out a spot on my shelf for it. Granted, I'll have all my little segments linked in the description down below, including the overview, the how to play, the kind of component breakdown, my final thoughts on the game, and even a section where I do my very best to talk about the criticisms I have or reasons why this game might not be right for your gaming group. But if I'm going to be honest, those criticisms are few and far between, and for my particular group, this one just sort of scratched all the right spots. Now, before we dive into this review, I have one thing to point out and one thing to request. The first thing to point out is that this is a prototype copy of the game. So the components I have are 3D printed, kind of hand-painted miniatures. The board is on cardboard. These tokens have cardboard underneath them. This is not the finished version. And along with that, I haven't been directly playing with a finished version of the rules. Everything is nearly there. But with any Kickstarter that's in the prototype process, this won't be a direct example of what you'll be getting to your table a year from now. It's a representation of, and a very close one, but if I know anything about Eldorado Games, they have a lot planned and a lot in store for the final production copy that'll end up on your and my shelf. The second thing, the request that I have, is if you like the way that I cover this game, please take the time to subscribe. I put out new videos every week, including reviews, Kickstarter previews, gameplay, flavor text, full documentary videos. I hope that there's something here on the channel for you, and so if you like the production quality, if you happen to think I have a reasonably decent personality, I'd ask that you'd stick around maybe a little bit longer, see what else we have coming down the road. And without any farther ado, let's go ahead and dive into Windward and talk about all the little elements that make this game so special. For my full game reviews, I have a format or a formula that I try to follow. It's something that I've sourced from the community, and so I do my best to break down points segment by segment. I'll be doing a very similar thing with this Kickstarter preview, except it'll be a little bit more kind of off the top of my head. I'll be going point by point, talking about my impressions, talking about my thoughts around the game. But all of those little segments, from the theme, the design, the gameplay, my criticism, all of those will be timestamped in the description down below. So if you're looking for something specific, feel free to hop down there and take a look at the different options we have to see if there's anything that you want to know as quickly as possible. Along with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below. I read and respond to every single question that's there. And if I don't know the answer, I'm sure we can figure out someone who does. In Windward, you are sailing the skies of Celius, a kind of gaseous planet with a molten inner core and a buoyant air that keeps everything afloat. You are captains of these airships, or I guess to some degree you're pirates on these airships, and you're sailing around, dropping boats, hunting down cresters, which are these large red or gray kind of whale-like creatures that exist on this gaseous planet. You are harvesting them for teeth, for fame, for the gas that keeps them afloat that also allows you and your civilization to prosper. You're bringing that back to port, trading that in for notoriety, which is the victory points of the game, and trying to be the most famed or well-recognized pirate by the end of the game. An average gameplay session lasts for just around 60 minutes, depending on the player count. It's for ages probably 13 and up, and I'd say in terms of complexity, it's probably mid to lighter mid. There are some choices that need to be made in terms of worker placement, resource management, the way you move around this planet. So it is a little bit more complex, but none of those choices feel overwhelming. And I never had any moments of player stagnation or analysis paralysis. They're all fairly straightforward. It's just a matter of how you want to use your resources, or a choice between one or two reasonably good options. I would also say that this game is absolutely new gamer friendly. It hits that sweet spot where it's not so long that you feel like it's draining or it runs out of steam. It's not so complex that someone can't pick it up with about a gameplay session. It's not necessarily an intro game. I think it dips just beyond an intro level game. It touches on a lot of really, really cool elements. You have kind of tactile movement here on the game board with the wind direction, which I'll dive into a little bit deeper because it's just a really, really good mechanic. You have a little bit of worker placement. You have a little bit of kind of a tableau where you're building out and customizing your ship. You have a tiny bit of resource management. You have a pick up and deliver mechanic where you're harvesting these cresters and trying to get them back to kind of the port as efficiently and effectively as you can while still avoiding other players, because the other element that you have in this game is PvP. You can be an airship pirate and just either hunt cresters or hunt down the other teams that are racing around this globe. This game has a lot of little things mixed in. It even has a tiny bit of asymmetric abilities, with each player board having a kind of upgraded section. One player board's better at using their boats. They get a little bit more movement. Another player board can upgrade their cannons if they rest at port for a cycle. It's one of these games that touches on all of these different mechanics that I really like. All these different themes, these gameplay strategies that I'll go to other bigger, heavier games to enjoy, to kind of scratch that spot on your back. Windward, in a simple yet complex and intricate way, seems to balance all of these different elements really, really well. In a light, kind of mid-weight game that I wouldn't be scared to take home to family or friends who are brand new to board gaming. But I've also had a fantastic time playing this with people who aren't new to board gaming at all. Some people in my community that are reviewers and designers and playtesters, in some ways just like I am. And we've been able to get as much out of this game as some people that don't play these games as often or as much, or haven't played kind of the breadth that we have. It's a game that has a lot to offer to a lot of different groups of people. As far as the game length goes, the setup, rulebook, teaching, and gameplay overall, the setup's pretty simple. These boards are all divided into different regions, so you kind of randomly generate this map. You'll put this port hex in the middle that'll help indicate the wind direction for all of the players. You have designated spots or feeding grounds for all of the cresters to live in at the very start of the game. Each player will take a player board, their ships, their boats. You'll have a stack of cards over here. You'll hand out a few cards. You're looking at probably maybe 10 minutes to set up. The rulebook that I had was about 6 pages long, pretty dense with text, so I assume that'll expand to probably about 10 or 12 pages once they add in more images and more pictures. But it took me maybe 15 minutes to read through and understand the rulebook, probably about the same amount of time to teach that to people who wanted to play the game. And once we were in the swing of things, once we were through the first round or two of gameplay, everyone seemed to sort of just click into it. It's easy enough to understand that after a round or so, you're just kind of focused on the cards in your hand, the options you have on your board, and how you want to move around this planet. The replayability on this game is quite substantial. First off, it is a tight little 60-minute game, and so you can get a lot out of it, and you end the session thinking of things that you could do better next time, or having a really cool scenario having happened. For instance, in the gameplay that I am going to be editing and publishing on my channel, we had a moment right at the beginning where I sailed out and, against all odds, defeated a red crester, and then the other player followed my trail, having upgraded his cannons, shot me out of the sky, took my red crester, harvested it for a tooth, and then went back to port and traded that tooth in for a little bit of notoriety, eventually leading to him just having a really dominating lead on me. And he continued to hunt me for the rest of the game. And we had a blast. And we ended it with a few cool stories to tell, and both of us wanting to give the game another try. The game doesn't have a ton of diversity in terms of the way that these player boards fill out. Really, there's 2 options per tile or upgrade token here. So you have 6 different options of crew members and some different ways that they can mix. You also have a few different options when it comes to the ships that you choose. Some of them have upgraded abilities in certain areas, but the game isn't so deep that you're not going to be experiencing the majority of what it has to offer within the first few playthroughs. But the game is a deep enough and good enough puzzle that you're going to want to come back to play it again, or try out a different strategy, or try to do something slightly better than you did last time. Along with that, because the map randomly generates, because the wind cycles every round, and because there's just enough diversity in these player boards, in the hand of cards you will have, it keeps it interesting and it makes it so you don't fall into a pattern or a rhythm or kind of a repetitious cycle of best practices for a game like this. As far as the quality of the components go, the prototype copy I have is actually really lovely. You can tell a lot of care has been put into the way that this game is displayed and sent out to reviewers. I can't speak towards the final production quality of the game. That being said, I can speak towards the company behind it. Eldorado Games has consistently put out really high quality games. When it comes to the theme and the design of the game, I think they merge really well. If you've watched my channel very much, you know that theme and gameplay mechanics for me are really attached to each other. I learn games through the story and through the theme. I remember rules and forget rules when they tie to or don't tie to the theme or the story that I'm telling on the game board. I was able to pick up every element of this game. Every piece of this game just kind of makes sense. You're setting sail, you're dealing with the wind, you have these terrain and obstacles on the board that you have to overcome, that you have to move and maneuver around. You're able to drop boats to fight these gray cresters that are on a different level from the red cresters, which are higher up in the sky. Everything just sort of works together. And it paints this picture, it tells this story that's probably best displayed from the front of this box. I mean, how magnificent is this piece of artwork, this diving whale-like creature, this airship floating in the sky. And I do have to say, one of the things that the game, at least this prototype copy of the game, left me with is a strong desire for more of the lore. The gameplay's there, and I can use this image to sort of visualize and imagine what's happening, and the rulebook has a little bit of flavor text in it. But I really wanted these ships to be built out a little bit more. Explain to me who the captains are. Explain to me why this ship is unique, why it is able to bring on extra cannons, or why this one's better at having boats with it. This game has a world behind it, and the gameplay reinforces that. The only part that's lacking for me right now is the ability to experience and dive into that world as far and as deep as I would like to. And so what I hope to see coming with this Kickstarter and with the official copy of the game is a lot more art, a lot more stuff in this style, a lot more storytelling. Break down these different ships. Tell me about the men and women who board them and fly them. Tell me about those people that are gaining notoriety and coming back to port to kind of champion themselves to the people. I want to know about this world, because the gameplay right now gives me more of a story than the game itself does. And that's good. That's high praise for the gameplay coming from me, who has a whole subcategory about flavor text alone. But I do want a little bit more flavor text. As far as player interaction on this game goes, player interaction can be middling or heavy. You can literally spend the game hunting down other players if you'd like, or this can be a very solo game where you're moving around the board, kind of playing your own game, trying to avoid the red cresters, trying to hunt the gray cresters, trying to upgrade your ship, and just trying to get fame before everyone else does. And while that puzzle is really satisfying, I think the best moments of this game comes from the tension that exists on the board when there's a group of people playing. So when you have 3 or 4 people moving around this board and you need to worry about avoiding them, avoiding their boats, hunting for the same resources, the potential of them tracking you down and blowing your ship out of the sky because you have too many cresters that you've already harvested because you haven't been back to port in some time. That's where this game really shines. And so if you or your gaming group don't love player interaction, that's something to keep in mind. I think the best parts of this game, while it's a solid puzzle by yourself as a solitaire experience, the best moments come from the player interaction that it facilitates and the way that this puzzle changes as you're trying to avoid other players around the game. As far as luck versus skill goes in Windward, this is really a skill-based game. Your movement patterns, the way you upgrade your ship, how long you stay at port to upgrade your abilities, are able to mediate that luck quite a bit. There is a little bit of luck when it comes to the way the wind direction is. You roll 1d6, and that'll determine kind of the positioning of the wind. But I've never had a game session where the wind was so limiting that it prevented me from kind of doing what I needed to do, or at least getting somewhere on the board to accomplish something that felt satisfying. The wind was a challenge. It changed the state of the game. It never ruined the game or hampered my ability to move. Instead, I just had to be maybe a little bit more creative with my resources or spend some extra movement points that I wasn't necessarily counting on playing. Along with that, when you fight, you are going to be rolling dice. These are custom dice with kind of handmade numbers on each side because they haven't manufactured the official dice for the game yet. And the same thing's true here. Sometimes you fight 1v1 dice or 2v2 or 2v5 and you kind of know the odds, but your hope is that you do a little bit better than average, just like dice work. But if you don't want to lean on luck, if you don't want to kind of take a Hail Mary, you can upgrade cannons, you can upgrade people, you can have cards in your hand that mediate or moderate or change that luck. And in fact, there's a lot that's done in this game to make those decisions kind of the player's choice. You're able to bring on a specific crew member before you leave port that'll give you +2 to red crester fights. You're able to choose from this open-faced market the cards that you want to stockpile in your hand. There's a lot of player agency, a lot of ways to make sure that these dice, during a battle, are always falling in your favor. Now, you might be spending more resources than you'd like, and there may be a few moments where a Hail Mary is kind of all you have. But those moments will be because you backed yourself into that corner. It'll never be the game working against you specifically. As far as the balance of this game goes, I feel like it's a really aggressively balanced game. There's a tiny bit of asymmetric powers with the player boards that might influence the way you play if you kind of lean into your ship's specialty. But overall, you're playing with the same deck of cards, you have the same access to different crew members. It's gonna come down to the way that you play the game, how efficient you are with your movement and your resources. That's going to be the deciding factor. At the end of the day, this is a game that tries to do a lot of different things. Movement, worker placement, resource management, PvP, and it does them all in a way that feels complete and balanced. Now, I've been over a little bit of this game, but let me go ahead and quickly explain to you what's going on in front of me. We just finished a gameplay session, that's why everything's still laid out, and I will very quickly walk you through what we're seeing in terms of the game state. I know there's going to be more in-depth how to play videos, and I don't intend this section to be a full overview or full how to play, but I do want to touch on a few key points. First off, this terrain map here has some really interesting mechanics. On the outside here, these are around the planet. So the opposite corner is adjacent to each other, as if you're sailing around this spherical board so you can go around the other side of the planet. Along with that, you have these drifts, which are pieces of molten rock from the core that are floating that block your movement patterns. And you have these Zyphers. These are all adjacent to each other for one movement point. And so they change how and where you pop up around the map. Because of all these options, the terrain elements that allow you to move around the board, the wind mechanic displayed here in the center becomes really, really interesting. And I think if there was one thing that was the standout element of this game, it would have to be the way that you play with and interact with the wind. At the beginning of the first player's turn, and at the beginning of every consecutive first player's turn, you're going to roll a dice. that will change where this wind is pointed. It'll always be pointed in a straight line up to one of these kind of adjacent points. That wind is a challenge or a puzzle you have to strategize around. I can go as far as I want for free in the same direction as the wind. I can go for one movement anywhere beside the wind, so to the side or around, and I can never go directly against the wind. It's just too strong. So as the wind moves, as it changes the player state, you may find that in certain positions, you have to go around the planet in order to get where you want to go, or you have to go through one of these ciphers in order to end up on the other side of the wind to get back around to the back. It doesn't hamper your ability to play the game. It doesn't restrict you. Instead, it opens up opportunities. In fact, you have 4 movement per turn. 4. With a potential 5th if you place a worker on it. So you have 5 movement per turn. And one of these achievement tiles that give you in-game victory points asks you to move 15 spaces in a single turn. And surprisingly enough, I've seen it happen multiple times. You have the wind headed in the right direction. You maybe start at port, so you spend a single movement to come out of port. And the wind's blowing this way. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces completely for free. You pop over here, there's your second movement. You pop around the globe for your third, and then you go 1, 2. Pop over here for your fourth. You can keep going, maybe play a card to give you another movement. You can keep going. And there in 5 movement, I was able to circumnavigate the entire globe. Now, I was set up in the right position, and I timed it correctly with the direction of the wind, but it's possible. It's possible to move around this board in really, really crazy ways if you just go with the wind or adjust to the wind. It's a really cool tactical puzzle you have to solve. Now over here, you're going to see the player boards we have. We have a cargo hold where we have bonuses, abilities, we keep our cresters, you keep your teeth until you turn them into the port. We have our gas storage. Gas is sort of the resource. You're picking it up, you're getting it from harvesting cresters, and you can spend it at market for either extra notoriety or cards, upgrades, equipment. They're kind of extra actions you get to take. We have our ship cannons. These are upgradable units that give you plus dice to your attack. So if you spend a cannon, you might get to roll 1 or 2 or 3 more dice. We have our boats. These boats are what interact with the gray cresters. So here's an important time to talk about a mechanic that I find really fascinating. Your ships are on the same plane or the same level in the sky as these red cresters. Your boats are on the same level or the same plane in the sky as the gray cresters. Your ships cannot interact with the gray cresters, your boats cannot be attacked by the red cresters, and so you're playing on these 2 different atmospheres. I think that's so cool. I'm not quite sure why, it's kind of a simple mechanic, but I love visualizing the act of dropping a boat down the side of the ship and it just sinking through the atmosphere, hunting these smaller, weaker gray cresters and then bringing them back to the ship and being lifted back up. Something about not only how the gameplay works as you move around and boats kind of get past other ships or have to deal with each other, but the visual, the story-driven element of that, to me, is quite lovely. It's really fascinating. Along with that, an important thing to note about these red cresters and the gray cresters is the gray cresters won't ever move. They'll always be at their feeding grounds, they're easier to get a hold of, and they're easier to kill and harvest, but they're not worth quite as much notoriety. The red ones are in the upper atmosphere, and they're going to come hunt you down. Every time your ship stays out in the open sky, a red crester is going to start moving in your direction. They're confined to the zones or the territories that they control, each one of these little kind of wedge pieces. But based on whichever one you're on, they're going to move towards you. So do you stop far enough away that they can't quite reach you for a turn? Do you position yourself just right to gain the notoriety by staying out for an evening, but maybe not, or maybe encountering a red crester which can be a daunting battle if you haven't upgraded your cannons, if you haven't upgraded your crew, if you don't have a pile of cards ready and equipped to face them. But if you're able to win, it can be quite a reward as well. It's these elements that kind of bring this game to life. It's this puzzle, this moving board that all seems to make sense, but all feels really good. And I don't know how long the designer spent working on this game, or how many hands were a part of it, or the people who gave feedback, but you can tell this game is a game that had a lot in it. I mean, it had to have at some point been cumbersome and overdone with the amount of little ideas that exist in it. And it feels like it's been trimmed away to the very best parts. It's been painstakingly and lovingly and likely painfully brought back to kind of a mid-weight game where everything feels like it fits. So the people who've worked hard on this game, the people whose feedback has been critical but honest, and the people who have received that feedback and cut and trimmed and torn away parts that I'm sure you would have loved to see here, good job. You've really developed and made something special. Now later I'm going to tell you I wish it was a little messier, and that's just because I like overly complex and messy games, and I'm willing to forgive them to, a decent degree. I'm a big fan of this game. I really like Windward, and I'm a big fan of the team over at Eldorado Games as well. They haven't paid me to say any of this, and I've only interacted with them in person a time or two at conventions where they were rushed and running around. They've earned my trust and loyalty through the years of backing them on Kickstarter. Before I was ever a reviewer or a creator or even heavily involved in the board game world at all, before I ever even played a lot of games, when I was first learning about board games, I was in the group of first backers on the island of Eldorado and the expansions to come after that, and they've thoroughly impressed me. And to be honest, they don't know that I'm going to say all this, that I'm going to talk about not just the game, but the company and the people behind the game. When I reached out to get a prototype copy of Windward, I asked them what sort of content they would like, what would be the most helpful, whether it was a how to play, gameplay, a Kickstarter preview. And their response to me was, we want you to give us a full and honest review with the good stuff, the bad stuff, the things you like, the things you don't. We want you to tell the truth. They sent me the rulebook, asked me if it looked like a game that I would enjoy, and after I read through it, I did think that it would fit me. I just didn't quite know how well. And it's really good, but I was and am prepared to give some criticism on it, like I try to do with every full review that I produce. The only problem is, I've really genuinely had a hard time finding a lot of stuff to criticize about this game. There's not a lot of holes I can poke. I have a few things that may make this game right or wrong for your gaming group, but I genuinely think this is an excellent game. But there are still some areas that I would like to touch on. First off, this game is kind of light to mid-weight. It's right in that sweet spot of just complex enough to be interesting, but not overly complex where people will feel tired or feel like it's burdensome or feel like they have player stagnation. The issue with that is, if you see this game and you want something heavier, this won't be it. After the first playthrough or two, you've really experienced everything that this game has to offer in terms of the depth. You play to get better at the strategy, to have really good moments with friends and family, just like a lot of those, family-based mid-weight games do. But if you're someone like me that comes from a more typically heavier gaming background, it's worth examining if this weight of game is something that fits into your gaming group. It plays in just about an hour, and while the gameplay is always really good, you still are solving the same puzzle over and over again, dealing with different challenges, dealing with different kind of environmental factors, but you're going down a very similar route to how you've played before. The two major differences to your gameplay style are going to be, do you focus on hunting red or gray cresters, or And do you focus on hunting down other players by being a pirate? Those are the most divergent ways of playing this game possible, and like I said, they can tend to be a little similar. This game touches on a lot of really nice elements, but none of them go aggressively deep. It's what allows it to maintain its status as a light to midweight game. Along with that, I would say this game plays best at a higher player count. 3 or 4 would be where I would recommend playing this game. When you have more people on the board, it becomes a more interesting puzzle to solve, and those encounters, those moments between players are, in my opinion, what really make the game shine. It does have a solo mode, which I have yet to try out, that looks really interesting. You have to move around this puzzle without ever staying at port, and you have to hunt down all of the red cresters as they kind of converge and conjoin around you. It seems like a really challenging and really good puzzle to solve. And the same thing's true at 2 players. You can have some player interaction, but more often than not, the 2-player experience will be a race to see who is the most efficient at gaining victory points as quickly or as fast as possible. It is a good game. It's just not the best that this game has to offer. For me, the best moments came from a player count of 3 or 4, where interaction and puzzle solving becomes a slightly deeper and more challenging gameplay experience. Along with that, I told you that I'd say that I wanted this game to be a little messier, and I do. I feel like a lot of things have been cut out, a lot of ideas and design elements have been pulled back so that it's as clean and nice to play as possible. That being said, man, when I'm playing this game, there's just a part of me that wants to be able to explore the dynamic between these atmospheric layers a little deeper than 2 miniatures, than one single encounter. I want terrain to be layered. I want ships to have other abilities. I want to experience the world. Are there other creatures that exist in this space? Is there some challenge or goal? Can these boats possibly move through some of these drift patterns? And I'm sure that's all been thought of. And I know what I'm asking for is a different game entirely. It wouldn't be the same game. It wouldn't be the game that I'm giving so much high praise to. But it does feel like there's room for a few expansions or a few adaptations that would make this game deeper and messier and just a little bit more complex, which, depending on how it's done, could fit my gaming group slightly better than this one does. Now, I think that might be an unfair criticism, so take it more as a comment overall. I like this game so much, I want a little bit more. And I am left with that feeling at times. I like this game so much, I want a little bit more interaction between the atmosphere and the models and the miniatures and the creatures. I like this game so much, I want a little bit more lore, flavor text for the boats and for the captains. I want a little bit more here in the cards. I want a deeper kind of card drafting system or structure. I want the victory points to last a little bit longer. I want the gameplay to last or be maybe a little bit deeper. There's a lot of elements in this game that honestly leave me wanting a little bit more. When I lose, I want it to be a little bit more ruthless. Have my ship fall apart a little bit, have my crew abandon me, but instead I lose my resources, which can be a big deal, and I get a +2 to kind of keep me in the game and keep it cycling. And that's great for a family game, for a mid-ranged game. But there is a part of me that is left at times wishing some of those messier elements that I think have been cut away were left in for players like me that want a slightly messier experience. Finally, the last thing that I'll mention with kind of criticisms or critiques of this game is that with the prototype copy that I have, some of the grandeur is lost. On this cover, we see this giant crester and this little tiny ship sailing through the clouds. And here, they're about the same size. It doesn't feel like this giant beast is enveloping the horizon. The same thing with the boats and the gray ones. They feel equal in scale. Along with that, because things exist on different atmospheric levels, you do have a tendency to run into some messy situations where you have a large ship over top of a gray crester with a boat that you just dropped and a red crester moving onto that same space. I'll be interested to see what the final game components look like. Will these be slightly bigger, staged in a way that makes you feel the grandeur of the playing environment and the box art a little bit more on the table? Will these be positioned in a way or designed in a way that gives you a little bit more room or agency when you're placing things on the board? How exactly are these tiles supposed to line up? Do you just remember that they're kind of all in that same central hex? It can work, but it might not be the cleanest answer or the easiest process for how these different levels are represented. Whatever the case, guys, if I haven't made it obvious by now, I genuinely think this is a very special game. It's unique and hits the sweet spot. It's a game that, for me, kind of gets that itch that you just can't quite reach with a lot of the other things on your shelf. It touches on a lot of little things that I enjoy, mechanics and elements, and has this really unique tactile movement system that is the highlight of it all. Along with that, it has an amazing team behind it and some pretty incredible art and lore that I'm excited to see more of. If you've made it this far in the video, I hope I've either displayed to you why this game is worth supporting, or shown you enough information about it so that you know for sure whether it'll be right or wrong for your player group. Whatever the case, if you've made it this far, please remember to like and subscribe. I put out new videos every single week, and I'd love to have you join the pond. And if you're here, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts on the game? Do you have any specific questions on mechanics or elements that I haven't dived deeply enough into? If you do, I'll be sure to read those comments and respond to every single one. And finally, please remember to do the important thing. Get out and play some games. We'll see you next time.